Hello, Lyssa deHart here. Today I want to talk about ICF Core Competency 1, ethical standards. And so it's a very large topic. I'm not going to cover all of it. I want to cover a couple of key areas though. So first off, I highly recommend if you're a coach or are looking to be a professional coach, that you go to coachingfederation.org and check out the ethics of the ICF. The standards of the ethics are so crucially important because what it does is it really indicates a level of professionalism that we as coaches hold ourselves accountable to. You see this in other professions where the practitioners of the practice, whatever that practice is have a standard of behavior. I have it as a clinical social worker. I know HR professionals have it, lawyers, accountants. I mean, there's an endless number of people who follow a level of standards, doctors, nurses, people who are considered professionals often have a standard of ethical behavior. And this is really useful to not only the practitioners themselves, so they understand the guidelines that they're and the framework in which they're working, but also to consumers who may have then recourse should they have a doctor who does a malpractice, or there's an attorney who doesn't do a good job being an attorney for them, or a therapist, or a coach. And so I want to steer you again towards the ICF coachingfederation.org, where they have the code of ethics available to you. There's also an ethical conduct review process, so that should you get a client who makes a allegation that you weren't staying within the ethical guidelines, there's a recourse for you and a recourse for them, so that there is a process by which that is assessed, as well as other resources that are available to you as a coach to understanding the fullness of the ICF core competencies around ethics. So with that said, I really want to look at a couple different examples of things where we may find ourselves in a coaching conversation that we are recording for an ICF certification or credential, or for mentor coaching. Now, for mentor coaching, I would say if an ethical dilemma shows up, it's a great opportunity to work with another coach to kind of suss out the ethical dilemma that might be showing up. Often ethical dilemmas show up and they are honestly, they can be any number of things that show up, that it's nice to have another person to bounce your ideas off of. One of my guiding principles is transparency with clients. So if there's a place where I am in a relationship with a client, I really try and make sure that we've talked about all the different elements of places where I can or cannot hold confidentiality. I try and really explain if I'm working within an organization with a client that I may be sharing information at times with their supervisor. All of that stuff is very above board so that we don't get into an ethical dilemma. But I never want to surprise a client with like, oh, and surprise, I can't keep that confidentiality. When we're thinking about, though, doing a recording for an ICF assessment, if you're going for your ACC, your BCC, or your MCC, we're not, as assessors, going to necessarily see the fullness of your contract or your agreement with your client. What we're going to see is this little window into this particular conversation that you're having, that you're recording, and that you're submitting. And so here's a few different examples of things that might get you into a bit of trouble in a coaching conversation that you're recording for a credential. So during the recording session, all of a sudden, the coach and the client have been talking. The coach, even at the very beginning of the conversation, has set the agreement. And then in the middle of the conversation, as the coach is asking, what do you hope you'll get from this conversation? The client responds with, a date. I've been trying to get you to go out with me for a period of time, and you told me if I did this, then you'd go out with me. So all of a sudden, don't submit that particular recording for an assessment, number one. Number two, it demonstrates a conflict of interest going on here. Not necessarily yes, on the part of the coach, because they want a recording so badly, they're willing to use a client who is clearly not interested in being a client, but also on the part of the client, in the sense that the client isn't really there to get coaching, the client is really there to get a date. And so that would be an example of something that if you submitted it, it may raise a red flag on the ethics of this particular coaching relationship. So, don't do that. Number two, another example would be you're working with a client and they describe being in a relationship where they feel threatened or feel there's a potential for violence. And the coach talks with the client instead of around safety issues. The coach goes, would you like to have a conversation? We can figure out how you can safely have this conversation with your partner, whoever that is. And this is a huge breach, because the client is saying that they feel unsafe. And at that point, gears need to switch, and the relationship or the conversation around the relationship needs to switch gears into safety. What do you need in order to be safe? Do you have people that you can surround yourself with? Law enforcement. Like, it is really an opportunity to discuss what other options the person might need to employ in order to have a safe situation. When somebody discusses feeling unsafe, feeling threatened, or feeling like they may be harmed, this is not a coaching topic to be figured out. This now becomes something where they need law enforcement, or they need domestic violence services, or they maybe need some other form of professional help where violence might be at play. It is always dangerous when people are in dangerous situations, and coaches aren't going to be able to support a client to have a better conversation, because there's a container of safety that really has to come first. Think of it as if you would the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's going to be very difficult for me to be enlightened and actualized if at the very base of my pyramid I'm not safe. So think of it that way. What first needs to happen for safety? A client is coming to the coach, and the client is talking about being sad, of just weighted down, worried, and having really dark thoughts. And they've been avoiding people, and their emotions are out of control. In fact, they feel out of control within themselves. And the coach continues the conversation in really the direction of what would help you to take action towards what you said was important to you a long time ago when we started this coaching relationship, versus stopping and having a conversation about the fact that if somebody is demonstrating depressive qualities, they probably need to be assessed by a professional. As a coach, we're not going to determine whether or not they're depressed. We're probably not going to say, you're clearly depressed, but we may say, what you're talking about sounds to me like depression, and I am not qualified to have that conversation with you. And again, going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if somebody isn't safe within themselves, they can't do any of the other things that lead towards their goals. So there may be another professional, like going in for an assessment, that needs to happen before the person is ready for coaching. And I'll just share a quick story. It was quite a while ago, but I had a client, and this is when I was a therapist. And so even for therapists, this is really important to understand. I was in private practice, and I had a client who was continually suicidal. I cannot hold the space of the suicidality all by myself. And added to that, the client was also using alcohol and other drugs to self-medicate this suicidality and this problem that they were having. And I had to get really clear with them. I can no longer work with you until you go through a 28-day program and you're A, sober, and you're B, stable, so that we can do the work that we're need to do. And the client had said to me, are you breaking up with me? And I'm like, no, breaking up means I'll never see you again. What I'm saying is I cannot work with you under these circumstances because you need other support before we can do the work that you and I can do together. So I think it's okay for us to say, I don't have the skill set to handle what is coming up right here. Even therapists have to say things like this. So again, if it comes up in a recording that you're doing for the ICF, stopping the recording and really working with the person on meeting what their actual needs are is crucial. Here's another example. During a session, the client spends a little bit of time saying how they're really wanting to work towards self-love. And from that point forward, the coach takes over and spends the majority of the time of the coaching acting as a teacher, acting as a guru, a mentor, a consultant, a cheerleader, a insert whatever in here, affirmation, positive affirmation describer, and starts telling the client what they need to do as though they know, number one, but they are in the role of telling the client, you know, you can do this. This is how you do it. You need to write affirmations. You need to really kind of pull yourself up and you can do it. I believe in you. And all of this stuff. They've stepped out of the role of coach. They've stepped out of even discovering what self-love means or what what relationships means or whatever the topic is that the client brings up. The coach steps into this place of not asking questions and telling the client whatever the coach feels the client needs to hear. And that really comes into the final one where in a business coaching situation, the client brings forward something around building better relationships with their peers at work. And the coach who worked with the same organization at one point proceeds to spend the remainder of the conversation talking about the different people in the organization, the pros and cons of them, the things to be paying attention to, and basically lays out how the client needs to navigate this organizational structure. So these become things that demonstrate the coach stepping out of the coaching role, or in the case of a client who is feeling depressed or is in a dangerous situation, needing to step out of the role of coach and get into the role of finding resources and helping the client figure out who best to work with them through what is possibly a very stressful and dangerous, possibly even moment in time. So I'm not going to go through all of the ICF ethics indicators. I highly recommend that you follow the link below and go and check them out. There are so many resources on the coachingfederation.org website about ethics and how to know when you're in and out of ethics and the things that need to be in or out of your paperwork. So for instance, just a real quick note on that, I am a clinical social worker as well as being a coach. And so one of the things that I have in my paperwork for my clients is I have a section around confidentiality and what I can and cannot maintain confidentiality around. I never want one of my clients to be like, surprise, you shared that with me and I can't maintain the confidentiality on that. So I'm real clear with people around what the limits of confidentiality are that I personally have. And I think ethics are complicated, but they depend on so many different factors. One of the things that I also highly recommend is at coachingfederation.com, there are people who work in the area of ethics specifically, and there's a hotline and you can call it and ask your questions about ethical dilemmas that you may have and get another opinion. You do not need to work alone when it comes to ethical issues in your coaching. So I wish you well, and thank you for watching this video.